My son-in-law yelled at the top of his voice, "Stop taking my car, you're nobody in my house." I didn't get angry, but silently drove to the dealer. For $200,000, my Rolls Royce was as shiny as revenge. At the traffic lights, I honked the horn. He saw me, turned pale as a ghost, and fainted. But that was only the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The Arizona sun hit the windshield like a hammer as I pulled Roxana's Honda Accord into the driveway. July in Scottsdale, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned steering wheels into branding irons. I shifted into park, satisfied with myself. Got everything on the list. Even remembered that specific coffee brand she liked, the one with the blue label. Movement in the garage caught my eye. Earl stepped out, and I knew immediately something was wrong. His shoulders were tight, his jaw set in that way that meant trouble. I hadn't even opened the car door yet. He stormed toward me, closing the distance in long, aggressive strides. I got the door open and 1 foot on the driveway before he started. "You don't get to just take my car." His voice carried across the entire street. "You think you can do whatever you want around here?" I straightened slowly, my hand still on the door frame. "I asked Roxana this morning. She said it was fine for the grocery run." "I don't care what she said." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "Stop taking my car. This is my property, you hear me? Mine." The heat rising from the asphalt wrapped around us both. I could feel neighbors watching, curtains moving in the house across the street, someone pausing their yard work 2 doors down. The weight of public shame pressed against my chest. "I understand you're upset, but you're living under our roof, eating our food, and you can't even respect basic boundaries." Earl's face was red now, his finger jabbing toward my chest without quite touching it. "You're a burden. Do you get that? A burden." The front door opened. Roxana stood there, one hand on the frame, her expression pained but not surprised. Not surprised. That detail stuck with me, sharp as a knife. "Dad, please." Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Just don't provoke him. You know how he gets. Can we all just calm down?" Don't provoke him. As if I'd done something wrong. As if asking to borrow a car, with permission, was an act of aggression. I looked at the grocery bags visible through the back window. 4 bags of food I'd carefully selected, paid for with my pension money, trying to contribute to a household where I was clearly unwanted. The bags suddenly felt like evidence of something pathetic. My attempt to matter rendered meaningless by this man's contempt. I bent down, opened the rear door, and pulled out the bags. They were heavier than they should have been, or maybe I was just tired. Tired of this. All of it. I set them down gently on the driveway concrete, a small act of control when everything else felt chaotic. Earl was still talking, something about respect and rules, but his words had become noise. I picked up the bags again and walked past both of them, past my daughter who wouldn't defend me, past my son-in-law who saw me as nothing. Neither of them said a word as I entered the house. That silence cut deeper than any of Earl's shouting. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like finality. Hours later, after a dinner where no one spoke and everyone pretended the driveway scene hadn't happened, I sat in my bedroom. Modest didn't even cover it. A single bed, a small desk, a dresser with a mirror that had seen better decades. This room hadn't changed in the 8 years since I'd moved in with them. Why would it? Poor pensioners don't redecorate. The house was quiet except for their voices downstairs. Indistinct, but unmistakably about me. I could tell by the rhythm of it, the occasional rise in volume quickly hushed. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room as I logged into my bank account. These movements were automatic after 15 years of secrecy. The careful typing, the 2-factor authentication, the moment when the numbers appeared. Investment portfolio. 1,427 out of 394. The construction supply business I'd built over 30 years. Sold the year before my wife died. I'd been smart about it, patient. Invested conservatively. Lived on my pension and Social Security. Touched none of it. Why? Initially, I told myself it was to avoid being seen as a wallet. To keep relationships genuine. To not be the old man whose money made him interesting. Now, staring at those numbers, I understood the real reason. I'd been preparing. For what? I hadn't known. Until today. I could still feel the heat of that driveway. See the neighbors watching, hear Roxana's weak plea for me not to provoke the man who just humiliated me in public, Earl's sneer as he called me a burden. They thought I was nothing, less than nothing, an obligation, a dependent, a fixture they tolerated. I closed the laptop slowly, my hand steady on the lid. Something had shifted in the space between the driveway and this moment. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too reactive. This was colder, clearer. I straightened in my chair, my jaw set, and looked at the closed door of my room. My room in my house, with my name on the deed. Details they'd conveniently forgotten. They wanted to see me as nothing. Fine. I'd show them exactly what nothing looked like, and then I'd show them what something looked like, what I'd been all along. I was already dressed and sitting in the living room when they came downstairs. Dawn had broken an hour ago, but I'd been awake much longer than that. Sleep had been impossible, my mind racing through possibilities, through plans, through the mathematics of revelation. Earl appeared first, barefoot and scratching his stomach through his t-shirt. Roxana followed, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. They moved through the kitchen with the easy comfort of people who owned the space. Their space. That's how they saw it. I sipped my coffee and watched from the archway. They didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. Roxana pulled out a pan for eggs. Earl scrolled through his phone, his thumb moving in lazy circles. The domesticity of it, the casual intimacy, the routine, made yesterday's cruelty even sharper. This was normal to them. I was furniture. We need to talk about the situation with your dad. Earl's voice carried easily from the kitchen. He wasn't whispering, wasn't even trying to be discreet. Roxana cracked an egg against the pan's edge. Oh, I know. It's awkward. Awkward? Earl set his phone down. He doesn't get it. He's living in our house now. The rules need to be clear. You're right. She stirred the eggs, her back to him. To me. He needs to understand how things work now. How things work now. As if the mechanics of my existence had fundamentally changed, and I'd somehow missed the memo. I stood, my coffee cup steady in my hand, and walked into the kitchen. They both looked up, startled. Had they forgotten I was here? Or had they simply stopped caring? My house. I kept my voice level, factual. The deed is in my name. Reuben Watson. That hasn't changed. Earl's smirk came quick and easy. For now, sure, but let's be honest. Who's the real provider here? Who pays the bills, keeps this place running? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You're just here. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They were waiting for the inheritance, waiting for me to die or become so incompetent they could take over. Either way, in their minds, this house was already theirs. I was just a temporary inconvenience. Roxana looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Her silence was louder than Earl's words. She wouldn't contradict him, wouldn't defend me. Again. I placed my coffee cup in the sink with deliberate care. I have errands to run. Errands? Earl's eyebrows rose. Where? Out. I grabbed my keys from the counter hook. I'll be back later. The confusion on their faces was almost satisfying. They'd expected anger, defensiveness, maybe another humiliating scene. Instead, I gave them calm. Control. Nothing for them to grab onto or throw back at me. I walked out through the front door, leaving them in their kitchen, in their house that wasn't theirs at all. The drive to the bank cleared my head. Morning traffic in Scottsdale was light, and my mind felt sharper than it had in years. This wasn't anger driving me. This was calculation, purpose. I'd spent 15 years playing small, and where had it gotten me? Disrespected in my own driveway, dismissed in my own kitchen. The bank's main branch sat in a plaza off Scottsdale Road, all glass and modern angles. Inside, the air conditioning was a shock after the parking lot's heat. I asked for my financial advisor. Marcus Chen appeared within minutes, his handshake professional and warm. We'd worked together for over a decade, but he only knew me as the quiet, retired businessman who checked in quarterly and never made waves. Mr. Watson, good to see you. What can I help you with today? We sat in his office, door closed. I want to make a significant withdrawal. Well, a transfer, actually, for a vehicle purchase. He pulled up my account on his computer. Of course. What amount are we talking about? $420,000. His fingers paused on the keyboard, just for a second, but I caught it. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. That's quite a vehicle. May I ask what you're looking at? Something that makes a statement. He nodded slowly, typing. The transfer will take 2 to 3 business days to clear, depending on the dealership's bank. You'll need to provide wire instructions. The logistics washed over me as I signed forms, verified my identity multiple times, confirmed and reconfirmed the amount. It felt real now, not just an idea in my bedroom at midnight, but actual money in motion, resources shifting from passive to active. Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, that was too simple. Anticipation, the sense that I was finally doing something instead of enduring something. I sat in my old sedan, a 12-year-old Camry with a dent in the passenger door and seats that smelled faintly of age. The contrast wasn't lost on me. This car, this humble vehicle that screamed, struggling pensioner, would soon have a companion that screamed something entirely different. I gripped the steering wheel and let myself plan. Step 1. The purchase that would shatter their assumptions. They thought I was nothing. I'd arrive home in something that cost more than most people's houses. Step 2. Watch their reactions. See the shock, the confusion, the realization that they'd miscalculated badly. Step 3. That would come. I didn't have all the answers yet, but the path was clearing. This wasn't about the car, not really. It was about taking back control, about exposing what they really wanted, who they really were, about showing them that the old man they'd dismissed, humiliated, and barely tolerated had more power than they'd ever imagined. I started the engine. The Camry rumbled to life, familiar and unremarkable. In 3 days, everything would change. They thought they knew me. They didn't know anything at all. I shifted into drive and pulled out of the parking lot. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. And for the first time since that scene on the driveway, I smiled. 3 days had passed since the bank visit. 3 days of research, of comparing specifications, of imagining this exact moment. I stood in the showroom now, surrounded by vehicles that cost more than most people earned in years. The dealership occupied a corner lot in Phoenix, 30 miles from Scottsdale. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in Arizona sunlight that reflected off polished marble floors. The cars were positioned like museum pieces, each one a statement, a promise, a transformation waiting to happen. A sales consultant approached, his suit crisp despite the heat outside. "Good morning, sir. Anything specific catching your eye today?" I pointed to the vehicle I'd come for, the Ghost, midnight blue. "Excellent choice." He walked me closer, launching into details I'd already memorized from my research. The 2019 Ghost is in exceptional condition, only 22,000 miles, full service history, single owner. At $185,000, it's priced very competitively for this market. $185,000 for a car. 5 years ago, Earl had called me a burden over grocery shopping. The irony tasted sharp and satisfying. I'd like to purchase it. Today. The consultant's professional mask didn't slip, but I saw the flicker of surprise. Wonderful. Let's discuss financing options. No financing, wire transfer. The funds are already available. 90 minutes later, I held the keys. They were heavier than any I'd owned, the Rolls-Royce emblem catching the light. The consultant walked me to the vehicle, reviewing features I barely heard. My focus was on the moment, the culmination of 15 years of pretending to be less than I was. I slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of leather so fine it barely seemed real. When I pressed the start button, the engine purred, a sound that spoke of power held in reserve, of capability that didn't need to announce itself. I pulled out of the dealership onto Phoenix streets, then merged onto the highway heading toward Scottsdale. The Rolls-Royce moved like water, smooth and quiet. Other drivers looked, some stared. I wasn't showing off. I was recalibrating everything I'd allowed myself to be. 15 years I made myself small, drove old cars, wore old clothes, let them think I was barely scraping by. I thought humility would protect me from being used. I was wrong. They used me anyway. The highway gave way to Scottsdale Road. Traffic was moderate, the afternoon sun turning everything gold. I approached a red light about 10 minutes from home, slowing to a stop in the left lane. A silver Honda Accord pulled up beside me in the right lane. I glanced over casually, then froze. Earl. Behind the wheel of Roxana's car, his attention fixed on his phone, thumbs moving across the screen. He hadn't seen me yet. My heart rate kicked up, not from fear, from anticipation. This moment was too perfect to be real, yet here it was, the universe offering me a gift. I reached for the horn and pressed twice. Two sharp, clear notes. Earl's head jerked up. He looked around, confused, then turned toward my vehicle. I watched the sequence of emotions cross his face like a film strip. Confusion as he registered an expensive car honking. Recognition as he saw my face through the window. Shock as he processed the Rolls-Royce. Then anger. Burning, unmistakable anger turning his face red. I didn't speak, didn't gesture. I simply held his gaze, let a small smile touch the corner of my mouth, and when the light turned green, pressed the accelerator. The Rolls-Royce surged forward with effortless power. In my rearview mirror, I saw Earl's Honda lurch forward awkwardly, as if he'd stomped the gas pedal in frustration. I maintained the speed limit for the remaining distance home, savoring every second. When I pulled into my driveway in front of my house, I positioned the Rolls-Royce prominently near the garage door. Let the neighbors see. Let everyone know. I sat for a moment after shutting off the engine, just breathing. Then I exited, locked the vehicle with a satisfying electronic chirp, and walked to my front door. Inside, the house was quiet. Roxana must be in her room or the back office. She hadn't heard me arrive. I set my keys on the entry table, the new keys with their expensive fob, placed deliberately where anyone entering would see them. In the kitchen, I poured water into a glass, then stood by the window, waiting. I knew Earl had been behind me on the road, knew he'd seen where I'd turned. It wouldn't take long. 15 minutes later, I heard it, an engine roaring up the street at a speed that made neighbors look up from their yards. Tires squealed as the Honda whipped into the driveway, stopping abruptly behind the Rolls-Royce. The car door slammed hard enough to echo. I stayed where I was, glass in hand, as heavy footsteps pounded up the walkway. The front door crashed open, hitting the wall behind it. Earl appeared in the kitchen doorway seconds later, his face flushed deep red, breathing like he'd sprinted the whole way. Roxana emerged from the hallway, eyes wide with alarm. Earl's arm shot out, finger pointing toward the front of the house, shaking with rage. When he spoke, his voice came out raw and demanding, stripped of any pretense of civility. "Where did you get the money?" Not hello, not what's this about. Straight to accusation, to what he saw as theft, as betrayal. I took a slow sip of water, let him wait, set the glass down with care, made eye contact. "I think we need to have a conversation, Earl. A real one." Roxana moved closer, her confusion shifting into something else as pieces started connecting. "Dad? What's he talking about? What car?" Earl advanced into the kitchen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Roxana stood frozen between us, her expression caught between loyalty and dawning comprehension. The truth was about to pour out. 15 years of secrets, and I was ready. Earl didn't wait for me to begin. The accusations erupted like a dam breaking. "You've been hiding money, pretending to be broke while we paid for everything." He started pacing, his hands cutting through the air. "We covered utilities, groceries, everything for 5 years, and you could have helped." Roxana moved closer to the table, her expression shifting from confusion to something sharper. "Dad?" Her voice was quieter than Earl's, but carried its own weight of accusation. "You had money this whole time, while we—" She stopped, but the implication hung there, heavy and damning. I set my water glass down with deliberate care. I wasn't going to be bullied or rushed through this. I gestured toward the kitchen table. "Sit down, both of you. If you want answers, we'll do this properly." Earl opened his mouth to refuse, but something in my tone, an authority I hadn't used in years, made him hesitate. Roxana sat first, her hands clasping on the table surface. Earl remained standing a moment longer, jaw working, then dropped into a chair. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the meek pensioner accepting their contempt. I remained standing at the head of the table, looking down at them both. 15 years ago, I began, I sold Watson Supply Company. The construction equipment business I built over 30 years. The sale price was $2.8 million. Roxana's mouth opened slightly. Earl's eyes narrowed. After taxes and paying off remaining business debts, I had just under $2 million. I invested conservatively. Bonds, dividend stocks, some real estate holdings, lived on the returns plus my Social Security. The current portfolio value is approximately $1.4 million. Earl's face cycled through emotions fast enough to seem cartoonish. Disbelief, anger, calculation. Roxana looked stricken, torn between hurt and something else. Greed, maybe, or regret at having miscalculated so badly. I never mentioned it, I continued, because I wanted to know my family valued me, not my bank account. Valued you? Earl's voice cracked. We paid for utilities, for groceries, for 5 years, and you could have... Could have what? I cut him off, my voice sharp for the first time. I offered, multiple times. You refused, remember? The words stopped him. Roxana's eyes widened as memory surfaced. 5 years ago, you lost your job at Canyon Logistics. You asked to move in temporarily. I said yes immediately. You're my daughter's husband. This is her childhood home. But I also offered to pay my share of household expenses. You remember what you said, Earl? His jaw clenched. He remembered. You said a real man provides for his family. That you didn't need handouts from an old man. That it would be temporary anyway, just until you got back on your feet. Roxana looked at Earl. He wouldn't meet her eyes. So I didn't push. I bought my own groceries sometimes. Contributed when you'd let me. But mostly I stayed quiet. Stayed small. Because you needed to feel like the provider, even though we were living in my house. Earl's chair scraped as he shifted, trying to regain footing. That doesn't matter. You lied by omission. Living in our house. My house. I walked to a drawer beside the refrigerator, pulled out a folder I'd placed there this morning. I'd known this conversation was coming, even if I hadn't known when. The deed says Reuben Watson, always has. I opened the folder on the table. The house deed, purchased outright in 1998, months after my wife died. Sole owner, no mortgage, no co-signers. Earl's face darkened as he stared at the document. For now, he muttered, and there it was, naked, undisguised. The expectation, the plan. Roxana spoke, her voice trembling. We assumed when you passed, the house would... She couldn't finish the sentence. I finished it for her. Would be yours. You've been waiting for me to die. She flinched like I'd slapped her. That's not... We didn't... But she couldn't deny it convincingly. Her eyes couldn't hold mine. Earl was less subtle. You're old. It's natural to plan for the future. But now we find out you've been hoarding money, living like a miser, letting us struggle. The revisionist history was stunning. They hadn't struggled. They lived comfortably in a house they paid no rent for, splitting utilities they'd pay anywhere, building no equity because the property wasn't theirs to build equity in. Struggle? I kept my voice level. You have good jobs. You live rent-free. You pay a third of what you'd pay for a comparable house anywhere in Scottsdale. That's not struggle. You made us look like fools. Earl stood abruptly, his chair scraping hard against the floor. Living here, judging us while you sat on millions. 1.4 million. And I never judged you. You judged me. You called me a burden 3 days ago, remember? In the driveway, in front of the neighbors. His face reddened further. That scene clearly still burned him. This isn't over. He moved toward the doorway, then spun back. You think you can just... What? Flaunt your money? Humiliate me on the street with that car? So the Rolls-Royce encounter had cut deep. You're going to regret this, making us look like fools. You'll see. It was a clear threat, though vague in specifics, a promise of retaliation. Roxana stood too, looking between us. When her eyes finally landed on me, the expression there might have been hurt, or might have been anger. I couldn't tell anymore. Dad, how could you? How could you let us think... Again, she couldn't finish. She followed Earl out of the kitchen. I heard them in the hallway, urgent whispers I couldn't quite make out. Then footsteps on the stairs. Their bedroom door closing with force. I stood alone in my kitchen. The house felt different. The pretense was gone. But so was any illusion of family harmony. I walked to the front window and looked at the Rolls-Royce gleaming in the afternoon sun. Worth it? Yes. Absolutely. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Earl's threat wasn't empty bluster. That was a man whose plans had just collapsed, whose self-image as superior provider had shattered. Dangerous. The silence from upstairs was too complete. They were talking up there, planning. I could feel it. I should probably feel worried. Instead, I felt alert, focused. I'd spent 5 years being walked over, dismissed, tolerated like furniture. Now they knew I wasn't helpless, wasn't poor, wasn't dependent. What would they do with that information? I returned to the kitchen and pulled out my laptop. Time to document everything. Every word said, every threat made. I opened a new document and began typing, recording the confrontation while details were fresh, protecting myself, because the war had begun in earnest, and I intended to win it. Morning light crept through my bedroom curtains, gray and hesitant. I'd slept in fragments, an hour here, 30 minutes there, my mind circling yesterday's confrontation like a dog worrying a bone. Around 6, I gave up trying and moved to the window. My eyes landed on the driveway. Something was wrong with the Rolls-Royce. The angle wasn't right. The car sat too low, listing to one side like a wounded animal. My stomach dropped. I dressed fast. Jeans, shirt, shoes without bothering with socks, and headed downstairs. The house was silent. Earl and Roxana's bedroom door remained closed. Good. I wanted to see this alone first. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the cool Arizona morning. Dew still clung to the grass. The street was empty, silent except for a distant dog barking. As I approached the vehicle, the damage revealed itself in stages. First, all 4 tires were flat, not deflated, punctured. I could see the slash marks, deliberate cuts in the rubber, then scratches across the midnight blue paint. Random at first glance, chaotic lines scored deep into the finish. But as I walked around to the driver's side, a pattern emerged. Someone had carved words into the door panel. Old fool. The letters were crude but deliberate, gouged deep through paint and primer down to bare metal. Done with a key or screwdriver, something sharp enough to permanently scar the surface. My hands clenched into fists. I looked up and down the street. No witnesses, no movement. Just neat suburban homes with their curtains still drawn. I circled the vehicle completely. Scratches across the hood. Both side panels violated. The trunk lid marked with random gouges. This wasn't opportunistic vandalism. This was personal. Thorough. Meant to hurt. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, my voice came out steady, despite the rage burning in my chest. I need to report vandalism. Property damage to a vehicle. Significant dollar amount involved. She asked routine questions. When did I last see it undamaged? Yesterday afternoon. Security cameras? Yes, but I needed to check the footage. Any suspects? I paused. Not yet. An officer would be dispatched within the hour. I ended the call and stood looking at the violated vehicle. The Rolls-Royce was supposed to be my declaration of independence, my statement of control. Now it sat wounded, marked with contempt. Movement from inside the house caught my attention. They were stirring. I walked back inside and went directly to the security system panel in the hallway. The small touchscreen showed the system active, green lights indicating all cameras functioning. I pulled up the footage interface and scrolled back to last night. The timeline jumped. From midnight to 6 a.m., nothing recorded. Just a blank gap where hours of video should have been. The system had been manually deactivated. What's going on? Earl stood at the top of the stairs, sweatpants and t-shirt, hair sticking up. His tone was carefully neutral. I looked up from the panel. The cameras were turned off last night, from midnight until 6 this morning. Did you do that? He descended slowly, one hand trailing on the banister. Oh yeah, I was cleaning the lenses yesterday evening. Forgot to reactivate the system. Why? What happened? I watched his face carefully. Earl was a mediocre liar, tension around his eyes, a too casual shrug that didn't quite land. Someone vandalized my car during that time. All 4 tires slashed, paint scratched across the entire body, the word fool carved into the driver's door. His reaction was interesting, surprise, but not shock. as if he'd expected something, but not quite this much damage. What? That's terrible. Did you call the police? The concern sounded rehearsed. Roxana appeared behind him, wrapping a robe around herself. What happened? I repeated the information. Her hand went to her mouth in a gesture of horror that seemed genuine. But something else flickered in her eyes. Guilt by association? Fear of being caught? Oh no, Dad, that's awful. The police arrived 40 minutes later. A uniformed officer took the initial report, photographed the damage, walked around the vehicle making notes. Then another car pulled up. A man in plain clothes emerged, badge clipped to his belt. Mr. Watson, I'm Detective Harris. I handle property crimes in this district. He was middle-aged, with sharp eyes that catalogued everything. He walked around the Rolls-Royce slowly, taking his own photos, making notes that the officer hadn't. When he spoke, his questions were precise. When did you purchase this vehicle? 3 days ago. His eyebrows rose slightly. Recent acquisition. Why such an expensive car? I recently decided to enjoy my retirement savings. He nodded, wrote something down. Any recent conflicts? Arguments with neighbors? Business disputes? The question was loaded. I hesitated, then provided a measured answer. I've been having some family tensions. My daughter and son-in-law live with me. There was a disagreement yesterday about finances. Harris's pen moved across his notepad. I'd like to speak with them if they're available. Earl and Roxana came outside, still in their casual morning clothes. Harris questioned them with the same measured precision. Did they hear anything last night? No. Notice anything unusual? No. The security cameras? Earl repeated his cleaning story. Harris's expression didn't change, but I saw skepticism settle into the lines around his mouth. And this family conflict Mr. Watson mentioned? Earl minimized it. Just normal family stuff. Reuben bought an expensive car. We were surprised he had the money. That's all. Harris looked between the three of us. Convenient timing. Argument about money, then expensive car gets damaged the same night, and the security system happened to be off during those exact hours. You see why this looks suspicious. Earl stiffened. Are you accusing me of something? Because I didn't do anything. I was asleep all night. We both were. Harris shook his head. Just noting circumstances. Without video evidence or witnesses, there's not much to pursue criminally. He turned to me. The damage estimate? I'd already called my insurance company while waiting for police. The adjuster had quoted $35,000 for full repair and repainting. Harris whistled low. That's felony-level damage. If you develop any information about who might have done this, call me directly. He handed me a card. After Harris left with his report and photos, the three of us stood in the driveway. The damaged Rolls-Royce sat between us like an accusation. I hope they catch whoever did this, Roxana said quietly. Earl nodded. Yeah, terrible thing. But I saw it in his eyes. Satisfaction poorly concealed. Pleasure of retaliation. Earl thought he'd won something here. Even the score. He was wrong. This just changed the rules. I looked at Harris's card, then at Earl. Yes, I hope they do too. The meaning was clear enough. Earl's smile faded slightly. Later, after the tow truck had taken the Rolls-Royce to the authorized repair facility, after Earl and Roxana had retreated back inside, I sat in my room with my laptop. The police report was filed. The insurance claim was submitted. The damage was documented. None of this would bring criminal charges. Harris had been clear about that. But it was all evidence. Evidence of what, exactly, I wasn't yet certain. But I knew one thing absolutely. The boundary had been crossed. They'd moved from verbal disrespect to property destruction, from family conflict to actual crime. Earl and Roxana thought they'd made a point, punished me for yesterday's humiliation. Instead, they'd given me justification, moral clarity. I opened a new browser tab and typed Arizona tenant rights, then family eviction Arizona, then unlawful detainer Arizona. The screen glowed in the dim room. Legal statutes, procedures, requirements, timelines. My face reflected in the laptop screen, illuminated by cold light, my expression determined and hard. They wanted to play games. Fine. But we were playing by my rules now. 2 days after the vandalism, I gathered documents into a leather folder. House deed from 1998. Emails from 5 years ago discussing the temporary living arrangement. The police report from the Rolls-Royce incident, bank statements showing my financial position, insurance photos of the damage, everything that proved what I knew. This was my property, my home, my life they were trying to colonize. I'd found Thomas Brennan through online research, an attorney specializing in property law and family disputes. His office was in North Scottsdale, 15 minutes from home. I'd called yesterday for an appointment, explaining briefly that I needed legal advice about removing family members from my property. The receptionist had fit me in for 10 a.m. today. I drove my old Camry. The Rolls-Royce wouldn't be ready for another week. The contrast felt deliberate, a reminder of the dual lives I'd been living. Modest Reuben in his 12-year-old sedan. Wealthy Reuben who could drop $185,000 on a car without blinking. Time to reconcile those two versions into one. Brennan's office occupied the second floor of a professional building. The waiting room was tasteful. Leather chairs, desert landscape paintings, current magazines. I checked in with the receptionist, a woman in her 30s who offered coffee. I declined. 5 minutes later, she led me back to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Scottsdale Road. Thomas Brennan rose from behind a mahogany desk, mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit that fit perfectly. We shook hands. His grip was firm without being aggressive. "Mr. Watson, please sit down." I settled into a client chair across from him, placing my folder on the desk between us. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." Your situation sounded urgent. He opened a legal pad, pen ready. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" I laid it out methodically. 5 years ago, Earl lost his job. He and Roxana asked to move in temporarily while he got back on his feet. I agreed. It was her childhood home. They needed help. Family supports. Family. We had an oral agreement. They'd contribute to household expenses and help with maintenance. "Did you document this agreement in writing?" Brennan asked. "No. It was family. We discussed it over dinner. Roxana's friend was present when we talked about them moving in, but nothing formal." He nodded, making notes. "Go on." "Earl found a new job within 6 months. Operations manager at a logistics company. Good salary. But the contributions never materialized. Instead, they'd settled in, treating the house like their property, me like an inconvenience they tolerated until I died and could inherit. I opened my folder and slid the house deed across the desk. The property is solely in my name. No joint ownership, no mortgage. I own it outright. Brennan examined the document. Clear title. That's good. What triggered the current crisis? I explained the grocery store confrontation, the public humiliation, my decision to stop hiding my financial situation, the Rolls-Royce purchase, Earl's reaction, the kitchen confrontation where they revealed their true expectations, then the vandalism. I showed him the police report, the photos. Brennan studied them carefully. The detective noted the suspicious timing, but said he couldn't pursue charges. No evidence. Security cameras were conveniently off during the vandalism window. My son-in-law claims he forgot to reactivate them after cleaning the lenses. Convenient. Brennan set the photos down. "Mr. Watson, I'm going to be direct. You have strong legal standing. Arizona law is clear. Property owners can terminate occupancy permission, even for family members, especially when oral agreement terms are violated. The challenge is proving those violations and maintaining proper procedure." "What's the process?" He leaned back in his chair. "First, we need to address your estate planning. You mentioned they expect to inherit. What does your current will say?" "Everything goes to Roxana. She's my only child. My wife died 22 years ago. Do you want to change that?" The question hung in the air. Did I? Could I cut my daughter out of my will over this? But she'd stood by while Earl humiliated me. She'd said nothing when he called me a burden. She'd participated in the expectation that I'd die soon and leave them everything. 90% to charities, I said. 10% to Roxana. She's still my daughter, but she's made her choices. Brennan nodded approvingly. That sends a clear message while protecting against claims you weren't of sound mind. Leaving her something proves you considered her, just chose to limit the inheritance. He outlined the eviction strategy. Step 1. Formal letter to Earl and Roxana documenting the oral agreement terms and their failures. This letter would also serve as notice that I was modifying the agreement, They needed to start contributing financially or vacate within 30 days. Step 2. Execute the new will simultaneously. Step 3. Detailed documentation. He wanted me keeping a log of every hostile interaction, every failure to contribute, every concerning behavior. Photos, notes, dates, times. Build the case. Step 4. When the 30 days expired, if they hadn't left, file formal eviction proceedings. How long does the process typically take? If they fight it, 2 to 3 months from notice to final eviction order. If they leave voluntarily once they understand you're serious, could be done in 30 days. I asked about costs. He quoted fees. $5,000 for eviction proceedings. $1,500 for will preparation. I didn't hesitate. Let's proceed. We spent the next 30 minutes on details. The friend who'd been present when they discussed moving in, her name was Jennifer Kwan. She'd helped them pack. Brennan noted it for potential future testimony. I signed the retainer agreement and wrote a check for $6,500. Brennan promised the formal letter would be ready by end of week, the will draft by next Tuesday. One more thing, I said. I don't want drama. I want this done correctly, legally, so it can't be challenged later. Brennan's expression showed approval. That's exactly the right approach. Emotion loses cases. Documentation wins them. We shook hands again. I left the office carrying the empty leather folder. I'd left copies of everything with Brennan. Walking to my car in the parking structure, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Control. Not revenge exactly, but agency. The sense that I was finally acting instead of reacting. The legal machinery was beginning to turn. I sat in my car before starting the engine, taking a moment to just breathe. Then I pulled out my phone and texted the Rolls-Royce repair facility about pickup timing. Their response came immediately. Ready for pickup Friday afternoon. I smiled. Everything was moving forward. By this time next week, Earl and Roxana would have the formal letter. The countdown would begin, and they'd finally understand I wasn't the helpless old man they'd mistaken me for. A week had passed since my meeting with Brennan. 7 days of careful documentation, noting every interaction in my log with timestamps and details. Earl's dismissive comments when I asked about the utility bill split. Roxana's avoidance, how she'd leave rooms when I entered. The continued absence of any household help, despite the 5-year-old promise. I was building a case, brick by brick. This afternoon I walked to the mailbox at the street, the Arizona sun pressing down like a physical weight. Bills, advertisements, a credit card offer, and a certified letter. My first thought, Brennan had sent the notice via mail instead of arranging a process server. But the return address was wrong. Marshall and Associates, Scottsdale, not Brennan's firm. I signed for it with the postal carrier, carried it inside. In my room, door closed, I opened the envelope carefully. Legal letterhead, formal language that immediately set my teeth on edge. I read it once quickly, my pulse accelerating. Then again slowly, absorbing the audacity. Earl had hired an attorney, and Earl was on the offensive. The letter claimed Earl and Roxana had provided essential care and support for an elderly resident for 5 years. It detailed supposed services, household management, meal preparation, financial oversight, companionship. The language made me sound helpless, dependent. Then came the demand. Fair compensation of $180,000, calculated at what they claimed was below market rate, for in-home care services. $180,000 for services I'd never requested and they'd never provided. But that wasn't the most concerning part. The letter continued with thinly veiled threats about my capacity to make sound financial decisions, citing the Rolls-Royce purchase as potentially indicative of diminished judgment in an individual of advanced age. The implication was crystal clear. They were threatening a competency challenge, attempting to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs. The letter concluded by requesting immediate payment and suggesting mediation to avoid costly and emotionally damaging litigation. I read it a third time, looking for weakness. The language was aggressive but vague, heavy on implications, light on specifics. No actual evidence of incompetence, no medical documentation, just insinuation and bluster. Still, it was a move I hadn't fully anticipated. Earl wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to preemptively strike, to make me seem like the aggressor, the unreasonable one. Clever, in a desperate sort of way. I scanned the letter with my phone and emailed it to Brennan immediately. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "I got it," Brennan said without preamble. First reaction? It's weak. Aggressive language covering a fundamentally weak position. He sounded almost amused. The compensation claim is ridiculous without a written contract specifying care duties and payment terms. The competency threat is even worse. Arizona requires substantial medical evidence to challenge someone's capacity, not just, "We think he made a bad purchase decision." Any judge would laugh it out of court. "But," I heard the qualifier coming, "but it shows Earl is scared. He spent money on an attorney, probably 2,000 to 3,000 for this letter, which means he's taking your threat seriously. That's good." We discussed response strategy. Brennan recommended ignoring the financial demand entirely while proceeding with our original plan. "We'll send our notice to quit as planned. Let them know their counterattack failed to intimidate you. If they want to waste money fighting this, that's their choice." My tension eased slightly. Having professional counsel made the difference between reacting emotionally and responding strategically. "Notice to quit will be ready for service within 48 hours, Brennan promised. That evening, after dinner eaten in cold silence, Roxana knocked on my bedroom door. "Dad, can we talk?" Her voice was soft, tentative. I considered saying no, but curiosity won. "Come in." She entered, closing the door behind her. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, or wanted me to think she had. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands clasped in her lap. "I know you got the letter from Earl's lawyer," so they weren't pretending ignorance. "I did." Roxana took a breath. "Dad, this is getting out of control. We're family. We shouldn't be threatening each other with lawyers and an eviction. Can't we find a compromise?" The word landed wrong. I leaned against my desk. "What compromise, Roxana?" "I compromise my home, my dignity, my right to be treated with basic respect in the house I own." She flinched. "It's not like that. Earl is just stressed about work, about money. You know how he gets. And then you bought that car without telling us, and it felt like you were hiding things, not trusting us." The revisionism was staggering. "I don't have to tell you about my purchases. And I wasn't hiding money. You assumed I had none because I lived modestly. That was your assumption, not my deception." Her mask slipped. "We thought, when you passed, the house would be ours. We've been planning for that. And now you're saying—" She didn't finish. I finished for her. "Now you know inheritance isn't guaranteed. That I might live another 20 years. That I might change my will. That you can't just wait me out." Silence stretched between us. Then Roxana's voice, smaller. "You changed your will?" I didn't answer directly. "You made your choice 5 years ago, Roxana. The first time Earl spoke to me with contempt, and you said nothing. Every time after that, when you chose his comfort over my dignity, you chose him. That's fine. He's your husband. But choices have consequences." Tears now, real ones. "I do love you, Dad. You're my father." Something cracked inside me, but I didn't let it show. "Then you should have acted like it mattered. Love is action, not just words. You acted like I was a burden to tolerate. Now live with those consequences." Roxana stood, wiping her eyes. "He won't leave without a fight." "I know," I said quietly. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. "I'm sorry. For what that's worth now." Then she was gone. Alone again, I sat at my desk. The conversation had been harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to relent, to find that compromise she'd mentioned, to repair the relationship. But I knew better. Compromise meant accepting continued disrespect, living as a guest in my own home, waiting to die so they could inherit. That wasn't compromise. That was surrender. I opened my laptop, added notes to my documentation log, Roxana's admission about inheritance planning, her acknowledgement of Earl's behavior, her plea for compromise without offering any actual change. All useful if this went to court. My phone buzzed. Text from Brennan. Notice to quit drafted. Sheriff's office service scheduled for Friday morning. Are you ready for this? I typed back one word. Yes. I stared at that reply on my phone screen, my thumb hovering over the send button for just a moment. Then I pressed it. The machinery of eviction was now inevitable. Friday morning, I sat in Brennan's office conference room. 2 witnesses, paralegals from the firm, flanked the table. A notary public stood ready with her stamp and seal. "This is now your valid will, superseding all previous versions," Brennan said, sliding the document across the mahogany surface. 90% to designated charities, 10% to your daughter. They don't need to know about this unless they challenge the eviction. I signed my name on each page where the tabs indicated. My hand was steady. The estate value had been calculated precisely. $245 million, including the house, investments, and liquid assets. Roxana's new inheritance, $245,000, down from $245 million. A significant difference. The witnesses signed. The notary stamped. Brennan placed the will in his office safe. "The notice to quit service is scheduled for 1 p.m. at your residence," he said. "Sheriff's deputy will hand-deliver to any adult occupant. You don't have to be present, but I recommend it. Shows resolve." I nodded. "I'll be there." Driving home, my phone buzzed. Email from Detective Harris with the subject line, "Case update. Vandalism report." I pulled into a parking lot to read it properly. The email was brief and professional. Investigation concluded due to lack of evidence, but the report would reflect suspicious circumstances and note persons with access and potential motive. His way of saying he believed Earl was responsible but couldn't prove it. Still useful, all part of the documentation. I arrived home at 11. The house was quiet, Earl at work, Roxana likely in their bedroom or out somewhere. I made coffee and waited. At 12:58, a Maricopa County Sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the curb. A deputy emerged, manila envelope in hand, and walked up the driveway with the measured stride of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I opened the door before he knocked. "Mr. Watson?" "That's me. I have a document for service." He consulted his clipboard. "For Earl Thompson, or Roxana Watson Thompson. My daughter is home. I'll get her." Roxana appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by voices. When she saw the uniform, her face went pale. "Ma'am, I need to serve you with a legal notice." The deputy held out the envelope. She descended slowly, took it with trembling hands. "What is this?" "Notice to quit. You'll need to read it carefully. Have a good day, folks." He walked back to his cruiser, drove away. The whole process took 90 seconds. Roxana stood in the entryway, staring at the envelope like it might bite her. "Dad?" "Open it," I said. She did, pulling out the multi-page document. Her eyes scanned the first page, widened. You're evicting us?" "I'm terminating an arrangement that stopped working years ago. You have 30 days to find alternative housing." Her phone was already out, fingers shaking as she typed, calling Earl. 30 minutes later, his car screeched into the driveway. He burst through the front door, still in his work clothes, face flushed. "What the hell is this?" He waved the copy Roxana had photographed and sent him. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, voice calm. "Exactly what it says. Notice to quit. 30 days. This is insane. You can't just kick us out. This is our home." "It's my home. You've been guests who violated their welcome. This is legally sound." Earl's hands clenched around the papers. "We'll fight this. 30 days. We'll take you to court. You're welcome to try, but you're not tenants with a lease. You're occupants without a written agreement. Arizona law allows me to terminate that with proper notice, which I've now provided." He paced, reading through the document more carefully. I watched reality penetrate the anger. The legal language was precise and unambiguous. Notice to quit, based on violation of oral agreement regarding household contributions, creation of hostile living environment, and suspected involvement in property damage. Earl looked up. "The vandalism? You're accusing us of—" "I'm noting that the detective's report contains suspicions about persons with access. That's factual." The bluster started crumbling. "Where are we supposed to go? You know rental markets are tight. First month, last month, deposit. That's $6,000 or more." The financial reality of their situation was showing. They'd been living rent-free for 5 years, spending Earl's $65,000 salary on lifestyle, not savings. "That's not my problem," I said, and meant it. Roxana spoke, voice small. "Dad, please. We'll change. Earl will apologize. We'll start paying rent, helping out, whatever you want. Just give us another chance." I looked at my daughter. For a moment I almost wavered. Then I remembered the driveway confrontation, the vandalized car, Earl's sneer. 5 years of small disrespects accumulating into one massive wound. "No," I said. "This is done." Earl tried one more angle. "Fine, we'll leave. But you're making a mistake. Roxana is your only child. Only family. You're choosing pride over family, money over blood. When you're old and alone in this big house, you'll regret this." It was meant to wound, to instill doubt. Instead, I felt clarity. I'm already alone, Earl. I've been alone in this house for 5 years while living with two people who saw me as an obstacle to inheritance. At least now I'll be alone with dignity. Earl had no response to that. He grabbed the papers, stormed toward the stairs. 30 days. We'll be gone. But don't expect a relationship after this. Roxana, come on. Roxana lingered, looking at me. I meant what I said the other night. I am sorry, but I have to go with him. He's my husband. I know, I said. And I did. She'd made her choice years ago. This was just making it official. She followed Earl upstairs. Doors slammed. Voices rose in heated argument, muffled by walls. I stood in my kitchen, coffee gone cold. The house felt different already. No longer theirs. Becoming mine again. I walked to the front window and looked out at the street, where the sheriff's cruiser had been parked an hour earlier. The legal strike had landed cleanly. Now came the waiting. 30 days until my house was truly mine again. 30 days to see if they'd leave quietly or make this uglier than it already was. I had a feeling I knew which way they'd go. 3 weeks crawled by after the notice to quit landed in my kitchen. The atmosphere in the house became arctic. Earl and Roxana moved through rooms like ghosts, avoiding eye contact, communicating in terse fragments when absolutely necessary. I documented everything. The lack of household help, dishes left in the sink, trash not taken out, their promise from 5 years ago, now just another broken commitment. Earl's hostile glares when we passed in hallways. Roxana's red-rimmed eyes from crying in their bedroom. They apartment hunted on weekends. I heard them come home defeated, voices carrying through walls they forgot weren't soundproof. Everything in their price range was smaller, older, farther from Earl's work. The reality of what they'd taken for granted was sinking in. 5 days before the 30-day deadline, a certified letter arrived. Earl's attorney had filed for a hearing to challenge the eviction, claiming established oral tenancy rights based on 5 years of residence. Brennan called immediately. "This is expected. They're grasping. The hearing is scheduled for today, exactly at the deadline. Perfect timing, actually. Judge will see they waited until the last possible moment. Doesn't help their credibility." This morning I dressed carefully. Dark slacks, button-down shirt, sport coat. Professional, composed, unshakable. This ended today. The Maricopa County Superior Court building rose from downtown Phoenix in concrete and glass, a monument to order and process. I met Brennan in the hallway outside the courtroom. He carried 2 thick folders and a leather briefcase that looked expensive and well-used. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We entered the courtroom. Wood paneling, state seal, the judge's bench elevated and imposing. Earl and Roxana sat on the opposite side with their attorney, a younger man, maybe 35, suit slightly rumpled, briefcase that had seen better days. Marshall and Associates apparently sent their junior partner. Earl's jaw was set, arms crossed defensively. Roxana looked small, hands twisted in her lap. The bailiff called the case. Watson versus Earl and Roxana Watson, unlawful detainer action. Judge Morrison presided, a woman in her 60s, gray hair, sharp eyes behind reading glasses. She reviewed the file briefly. "This is a challenge to a notice to quit, served 3 weeks ago. Mr. Marshall, you're representing the respondents?" Earl's attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We're contesting the eviction on grounds of established tenancy." Marshall presented his case. 5 years of continuous residence. Verbal agreement for permanent housing. Contributions to household expenses. Emotional and practical support for an elderly owner. He painted Earl and Roxana as caregivers, me as ungrateful and capricious. "They've built their lives around this arrangement, Your Honor. To suddenly revoke permission without cause is unconscionable." Judge Morrison looked unimpressed, but let him finish. Brennan stood for my response. His presentation was methodical, devastating. First, the property deed, proving sole ownership. Second, documentation of the original oral agreement. Email exchanges from 5 years ago explicitly stating temporary stay while you get back on your feet and help with household maintenance in exchange for free room. Third, my testimony under oath that I'd repeatedly offered to pay my share of expenses but was refused by Earl, who wanted to appear as the provider. Fourth, the vandalism evidence. Photos of the Rolls-Royce damage. Detective Harris's report noting suspicious circumstances and persons with access. The convenient security camera malfunction. Fifth, recordings of Earl's disrespectful comments. Arizona is a one-party consent state. I'd legally recorded conversations after the kitchen confrontation. The judge listened to a 30-second clip through the courtroom speakers. Earl's voice, clear and unmistakable. The old man doesn't understand. This is our house now. We're just waiting him out. I watched Earl's face drain of color. Judge Morrison had questions. She addressed Earl directly. Mr. Earl, the original agreement mentioned household help. What specific tasks did you perform? Earl stammered. Well, we lived there, helped out, general stuff. Can you be specific? Did you maintain the yard, handle repairs, clean common areas? His face reddened. Roxana did some cooking. I helped with... We were there. We were family. It was weak and he knew it. Marshall tried to salvage. Your Honor, this was a family arrangement, not a formal contract. The specifics were fluid. Judge Morrison cut him off. But Mr. Watson's attorney has produced written evidence of the agreed terms. Email stating, help with household maintenance, in exchange for housing. The burden is on your clients to show they met those terms. I'm not seeing that evidence. She turned to me. Mr. Watson, why now? After 5 years, why a victim at this particular time? My answer was measured. Your Honor, the disrespect escalated. When I revealed I wasn't financially dependent on them, the hostility became unbearable. My vehicle was vandalized. I no longer feel safe or respected in my own home. I have the right to decide who lives in my property. Judge Morrison reviewed her notes. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of her pen. Then she spoke. This is fairly straightforward. Mr. Watson owns the property outright. The respondents are not tenants under Arizona law. No written lease, no regular rent payments. They were guests under an oral agreement that specified certain responsibilities. The evidence shows they failed to meet those responsibilities and created a hostile environment. The notice to quit was properly served with 30 days warning. She looked at Earl and Roxana. I understand this is difficult, but Mr. Watson has every legal right to revoke permission for you to occupy his property. His reasons are well documented and supported by evidence. Her gavel came down. The eviction is upheld. You have 30 days from today's date to vacate the premises. If you fail to leave voluntarily, Mr. Watson may seek a forcible removal order. Earl shot to his feet. This isn't fair. Where are we supposed to go? Can't we work something out? We'll pay rent, sign a lease, whatever? Judge Morrison's expression hardened. The property owner is not obligated to continue housing you. This hearing is concluded. Earl turned to me, desperation replacing anger. Reuben, please, be reasonable. We'll pay $1,500 a month, help around the house, anything you want. Every eye in the courtroom turned to me. Brennan touched my arm gently. This was my call. The moment hung suspended. Then I spoke, voice quiet but carrying. No, I want you gone from my home. Outside the courthouse, afternoon sun blazing, Brennan shook my hand. Clean victory, about as decisive as these cases get. I felt hollowed out, emptied of tension I'd been carrying for weeks. What happens if they don't leave? Then we file for forcible removal. Sheriff's deputies physically remove them and their belongings. It won't come to that. They know they lost. In the parking garage, I sat in my car. Not the Rolls-Royce, which was still being repaired, but my old reliable sedan. Through the windshield, I could see Earl and Roxana by their Honda, arguing. Marshall stood awkwardly nearby. Roxana was crying. Earl's hands gestured wildly. Their world had just contracted severely. I started my engine and drove away, leaving them in the rearview mirror. The next 30 days would be tense, uncomfortable, saturated with resentment. But they would end. I merged onto the Phoenix freeway. rolled down the windows. Desert air rushed in, hot and clean. For the first time in 5 years, I felt it. Anticipation of peace. Moving day arrived on a Saturday in mid-August. I stood by my front window, coffee in hand, watching the rented U-Haul truck being loaded with boxes and furniture. The Rolls-Royce sat in the driveway, fully repaired, midnight blue paint gleaming. Insurance had covered $32,000, the $35,000 damage. The remaining $3,000 I'd paid out of pocket, worth every penny to see it restored. Earl carried a box to the truck, his movements sharp with residual anger. Roxana followed with smaller items, her shoulders hunched. They'd found an apartment, $800 a month for a 2-bedroom in Tempe, 30 minutes from Earl's work. The deposit and first month had depleted what little savings they had. Reality's price tag. I didn't go outside, didn't offer to help. We'd said everything that needed saying in that courtroom 3 weeks ago. Around 11, Earl closed the truck's rear door with a metallic slam. He stood for a moment, staring at the house, at my house, like he was memorizing it or cursing it, probably both. Roxana climbed into the passenger seat, but before closing the door, she turned and looked directly at my window. Our eyes met across the distance. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was something more complex, resentment mixed with something that might have been understanding. Too little, too late. She climbed in. The truck rumbled to life. They drove away. I watched until the U-Haul disappeared around the corner. Then I set down my coffee and walked through my house. The master bedroom where they'd slept was empty now, just carpet marks where furniture had stood. I opened the windows, letting fresh air chase away 5 years of occupation. Their bathroom, vacant. The spare room they'd used for storage, cleared. The kitchen where so many tense meals had been eaten in silence. Mine again. I walked from room to room, reclaiming each space. Not with triumph, but with quiet satisfaction. This was restoration, not revenge. The next day, Sunday, I drove to Brennan's office for our final meeting. He'd asked me to come in to sign completion paperwork and settle the final accounting. His receptionist wasn't in, weekend appointment, just the two of us. Brennan met me at the door, shook my hand. Congratulations. Not many of these cases end this cleanly. You got your house back, your peace back, and you did it all legally. That's a real victory. We sat in his office. He walked me through the final documents. The judge's order, filed and recorded. The eviction completion certificate. The updated property records showing no occupants except me. Total legal fees, $8,200. I wrote the check without hesitation. Worth it? Brennan asked. Every cent. He leaned back in his chair. Are you going to stay in the house? It's a lot of space for one person. It's my space. I built that equity over 30 years of work. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I'm going to enjoy every moment of it. Brennan smiled. Good answer. We shook hands one final time. As I left his office, I felt the weight of the past months lift. No more hearings, no more documentation, no more lawyers. Just life. My life on my terms. That evening, I sat on my back patio as the sun set over Scottsdale. The desert sky turned orange and purple, spectacular in its transition. I'd made coffee, the good kind, the Blue Label brand Roxana used to prefer. But this was for me now. Everything was for me. The house behind me was quiet. Not the hostile silence of recent months, but genuine peace. The kind of quiet that comes from being truly alone in your own space, answerable to no one, accepting no one's contempt. I'd reclaimed more than property. I'd reclaimed my dignity, my autonomy, my right to respect. The cost was high, a fractured relationship with my daughter, probably permanent, but the alternative would have cost something more precious. My self-respect. For 5 years, I'd accepted less than I deserved, because I thought family meant enduring disrespect. I was wrong. Family should mean mutual respect, or it means nothing. I'd spent $185,000 on a car that got vandalized and ate $200 on legal fees to evict my own daughter. Numbers that would horrify most people. But I'd have spent twice that to feel what I felt now, at peace, in control, free. The Rolls-Royce sat in my garage, ready for whenever I wanted to drive it. My investment portfolio remained solid at $1.4 million. My will was updated. 90% to charities that would use it well, 10% to Roxana because despite everything, she was still my daughter. Whether she'd ever understand why this happened, whether she'd ever see that her choices led here, I didn't know. Maybe someday, maybe never. It didn't matter anymore. The sun touched the horizon and the sky blazed one final time before darkness. I finished my coffee and went inside, locking the door behind me. My door, my house, my life. Finally, completely, mine. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.